Right now, as you're watching this, the world's attention is fixed on western Colombia, where a magnitude 7.4 earthquake, the strongest to hit the country this century, has killed more than 200 people, flattened buildings in Cali and Pereira, and forced the country's brand new president into a national disaster declaration on his first full day in office. Rescue teams are still working through collapsed buildings in Pereira. Patients evacuated from a damaged clinic in Cali are being treated in a temporary gymnasium ward. And relief organizations, including World Central Kitchen, have activated their disaster response network to get emergency food aid into the region, partnering with local restaurants that were already cooking before the quake struck. Colombia's own statistics agency has already drawn comparisons to the country's last truly catastrophic earthquake, a magnitude 6.1 event in 1999 that killed almost 1,200 people and destroyed nearly 36,000 homes, meaning residents this century. While nearly every camera on the planet was pointed at that disaster, a very different kind of emergency was quietly building 8,000 miles away in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. On the 13th of August, forecasters confirmed Tropical Storm Lala had formed east of Hawaii and issued the state's first hurricane watch of the entire season for the Big Island. Less than 24 hours later, that watch had already been upgraded to a full hurricane warning, with winds of 75 miles per hour expected to arrive by Saturday morning. Again, a tropical storm watch was added for all of Maui County. This is the story of Hurricane Lala, the storm that formed and strengthened almost entirely outside the news cycle, and what its approach means for a state still recovering from the deadliest wildfire disaster in modern American history. No hype, no exaggeration, just what the data says and why it matters. Drop a comment and tell me if you have friends or family in Hawaii right now. I read every one of these. If you want grounded storm coverage instead of panic headlines, subscribe. It is free, and a like helps this reach people who need to see it before the weekend. Let us go for 5,000 likes on this one. Thank you. Now let us get into it. Lala's story starts on the 13th of August, when the National Hurricane Center confirmed the storm had organized roughly 705 miles east-southeast of Hilo, with maximum sustained winds of 40 miles per hour, just barely above the threshold that separates a tropical depression from a named tropical storm. At that point, forecasters were already flagging that Lala could strengthen further and approach the islands near hurricane strength over the coming weekend. And a hurricane watch, meaning hurricane conditions were considered possible within 48 hours, was posted for Hawaii Island that same day. A strong, mid-level ridge sitting north of the islands was steering the storm on a fairly consistent west-northwestward track, and forecasters noted the storm's forward speed was likely to slow further as its core began interacting with the Big Island's mountainous terrain that can either weaken a storm through friction or, in some cases, wring even more rainfall out of it as moist air is forced upward over the volcanoes. Elsewhere in the eastern Pacific that same day, a separate system organized into Tropical Storm Hernan, roughly 1,460 miles west of Mexico's Baja California peninsula. But forecasters confirmed Hernan posed no threat to any landmass, meaning Lala remained the only storm anyone in Hawaii actually needed to watch. This season also arrives with new forecasting tools in place specifically for Hawaii. The National Hurricane Center confirmed it is rolling out storm surge watches and warnings for the main Hawaiian islands for the first time, along with a dedicated peak storm surge graphic, tools that had previously only been available for the continental United States, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. By the following evening, the storm had strengthened enough that the watch was upgraded to a hurricane warning for Hawaii County, meaning hurricane conditions were no longer just possible but expected somewhere in the warning area, typically issued about 36 hours ahead of the anticipated arrival of tropical storm force winds. At the same time, a tropical storm watch was issued for the whole of Maui County, covering Maui, Lanai, Molokai, and Kahulaui, with tropical storm conditions possible there by late Saturday. The National Weather Service's local forecast office in Honolulu laid out the specific threats residents needed to prepare for: hurricane-force wind gusts reaching 75 miles per hour in exposed areas such as Hawaiian Ocean View estates, life-threatening flash flooding, and the possibility of tornadoes spinning up within the storm's outer bands. Forecasters also warned that wind speeds on ridgelines and the windward slopes of the island's volcanoes could run up to 30% stronger than the near-surface winds listed in official advisories, meaning mountain communities could see gusts well beyond what the headline number suggests. A high surf advisory was also issued for the south shores of every island in the chain, with breaking waves of 8 to 12 feet expected along those coastlines even before the storm's center arrived. Big Island public schools initially confirmed they would remain open even as the watch was in effect. A decision officials said they would continue to reassess as the storm's track became clearer through the following day, alongside separate news that Hawaii's State Public Utilities Commission had just approved another round of utility infrastructure spending, underscoring how much of the island's power grid remains a live concern heading into any major storm. The rainfall forecast is where this storm becomes genuinely dangerous rather than just disruptive. The National Weather Service is forecasting rainfall totals of 8 to 12 inches across Maui and the Big Island, with isolated maximum totals as high as 25 inches possible on the Big Island itself, largely driven by that same mountain interaction, slowing the storm down and forcing it to dump rain over the same terrain for longer. The rest of the island chain is expected to see 4 to 6 inches, with isolated maximum totals up to 8 inches. Rainfall on that scale, concentrated over steep volcanic terrain in a matter of hours, is exactly the kind of setup that produces life-threatening flooding and mudslides, particularly in the steep, narrow valleys that cut through the Big Island's windward side, valleys that drain enormous amounts of water very quickly, once saturated, and can turn a normally dry gulch into a fast-moving torrent with very little warning. Here is the comparison that matters, because Hawaii's relationship with tropical cyclones over the past few years has been genuinely fraught, and Lala is not an isolated first for the state. It is the latest chapter in a pattern residents have had to live through repeatedly. In August of 2023, Hurricane Dora never made landfall anywhere near Hawaii, tracking well south of the islands as a powerful Category 4 storm with winds of 150 miles per hour at its peak. But the combination of Dora's strong winds, TO the south, and a separate area of high pressure to the north created an unusually intense pressure gradient across the islands, and that gradient, not the storm itself, is what fanned the flames of the Maui wildfires that killed more than 100 people and became the deadliest wildfire disaster in the United States in over a century. 1 year later, in August of 2024, Hurricane Hone tracked south of the Big Island as a Category 1 storm with winds of 85 miles per hour, and even without a direct landfall, its outer winds again raised. Fears of spreading wildfires across the Big Island in Maui, close enough to the anniversary of the Dora disaster that Hawaii County's Civil Defense Agency activated in response before the storm had even fully arrived, and an international outrigger canoeing competition being held on the islands that week was cut short because of the threat. Lala now becomes the storm to test that same vulnerability again, except this time official guidance suggests a much closer and more direct track toward the Big Island itself, rather than a storm passing safely to the south the way both Dora and Hone did. So what does all of this actually mean for you if you live in Hawaii, or if you have family and friends there watching this storm approach right now? It means the threat from Lala is genuinely twofold rather than singular. There is the direct threat, 75 mile per hour winds, life-threatening flash flooding, and rainfall totals heavy enough to trigger mudslides in steep terrain, expected to begin affecting the Big Island by early Saturday morning and reaching Maui County by late Saturday. And there is the secondary threat. Hawaii has now learned to watch for the hard way after Dora and Hone, the possibility that strong winds interacting with the island's terrain, even from a storm that does not make a textbook direct landfall, can dry out vegetation on the leeward side and elevate wildfire risk in exactly the kind of communities still rebuilding from the last disaster. So here is the honest, grounded summary. While global attention was locked onto the earthquake devastation in Colombia, a storm that started as an unremarkable tropical depression 700 miles off Hawaii as its coast strengthened fast enough to earn the state's first hurricane watch of the season on the 13th of August. It was upgraded to a full hurricane warning for the Big Island within 24 hours, alongside a tropical storm watch for all of Maui County. Forecasters are expecting hurricane-force gusts of 75 miles per hour, rainfall totals up to 25 inches in isolated spots on the Big Island, and life-threatening flooding and mudslide risk as the storm's core interacts with the island's mountainous terrain and slows down directly over it. It is the third consecutive year that a tropical cyclone has forced Hawaii to reckon with the same dangerous combination of wind, terrain, and wildfire risk that made Hurricane Dora so devastating in 2023. And this time, the storm is tracking closer to a direct hit than either of the two storms that came before it. We will keep tracking this the same way we did today, straight from the National Hurricane Center, the Central Pacific Hurricane Center, and the National Weather Service office in Honolulu, not recycled headlines. Subscribe so you do not miss how this develops over the weekend, because based on the current track, the next update could change quickly. And leave that comment below. Tell me if this is the first you are hearing that Hawaii even had a storm approaching, because for a lot of people watching the news out of Colombia this week, it very well might be. Because behind every one of these numbers is a family on the Big Island boarding up windows for the first time this season, a civil defense office in Hilo, watching the same wind and wildfire risk that devastated Maui just 3 years ago, and a community still rebuilding from the last storm that never even made landfall. 5,000 likes on this one. Let us go. See you in the next one.